Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Rollwise podcast, your show where we talk about things that are adjacent to RPGs. Today, we have a special-ish episode in terms of we haven't really done this type of thing before, but we are doing the first ever book report as requested by some commenters in one of our previous videos, because they had actually suggested that we dive deeper into the Game Masters Handbook of Proactive Role-Playing. So that is this video. We are going through part one of the 3 parts that are within this book, and this is going to be creating proactive characters. We're going to discuss a little bit about what we've learned in the first 3 chapters, what we like about it, some of the stuff that we feel may not have been as successfully conveyed. But obviously, since there are 3 parts, we are going to try to finish the rest of these in subsequent videos down the road and probably give an overall feeling as to how we perceive the book to have accomplished its goals of helping people become better proactive role players. So with that being said, I thought I'd do just a brief introduction. So the book itself, it's part of the Good Game Master series. There are other books out there that are part of this series. So if you're interested, you can get stuff like encounter design, villains, and stuff like that. They've actually got people from a few different areas within the D&D D&D-osphere. Is that a real word?
It is now, I guess.
It is now. But basically there are different aspects that you can obviously gain inspiration and learn about if you would like to read from these various people that put together. However, the Game Master's Guide to Proactive Role Playing was written by the Fischels, Jonah and Tristan Fischel. Jonah has been, according to the book's history and kind of about the author, has been playing tabletop role playing games for 20 years, game mastered a lot, and he kind of has he's a learning differences tutor. Tristan is an author and RPG writer. Been playing tabletop RPGs for a little less time than his brother, and started his role-playing career as a guinea pig for Jonah's Dungeons. So, I mean, as with any good origin story, usually there's a villain, I guess. I don't know.
I thought you were going to say sibling, but I guess villain fits.
Sure, sibling, villain, and all that kind of stuff. But Tristan has written several adventures, rules, expansions, and other content for 5e and a few of their other favorite systems. And of course, he also runs home games for friends, writing, and all that kind of stuff. So this is coming from a place that looks like it's written by 2 people that are actively interested in the tabletop RPG scene. And this book has been, I think it's been kind of pointed at the 5e crowd, but it definitely does. It's not like advice that only people that play 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons can use.
It is definitely pointed to. I think it is definitely pointed at the 5e crowd. There is some good advice in there, but some of the advice is present in other games where it's not present in D&D. Is what I would say.
So I guess let's start with the good stuff. Since we're talking about part 1, what did you guys like about this particular section? What really did you go, oh, this is good, or whatnot?
I think I think especially for a D&D style game where just encouraging to have separate motivations other than the narrative that the GM is presenting is nice for more of a kind of sandboxy, not just you're doing an adventure sort of game, which I think is I prefer those games a little bit more. I'm sure certain tables wouldn't, where it's like, oh, my character's a human, he has other goals other than adventuring. And I think that was cool. That I like that.
What about you, Jeff? What did you like about this first section?
I honestly, the first thing that I like is while the layout is kind of simple, it did lend itself to understanding, what they were talking about. It made it easy to read. I thought they laid out the case at the beginning it wasn't the first chapter. It was the introduction for proactive role playing and, why they're big believers in it. I'm a big believer because of all the other games that we've played. I think it makes for a better shared story and more engagement from the players, if that's what the players want. We've talked about this before. There's times you have players that want to be passive, and the proactive may not be the style that they want to play, but if you have people that are open to it, it really ups the engagement and it takes a lot of work off the GM, not all of it, right? But it removes some, and I thought they did a good job laying out the case. I think proactive role playing is, probably the future of role playing in my mind. Depending on the people, like some people, you like what you like.
Yeah, it depends on the game too.
Sure.
Like since we recently played it, like when I was reading this, I was thinking of like Electric Bastion Land. Like that would be a game that not this necessarily isn't for, because it's more designed about one shots and simple characters and stuff like that. Like you can do it to flesh out your character, but it's more something that'll probably come up in the middle of the game versus sit down and write it out. Because those games just aren't really designed that. They're just really not designed for characters like that. It's more just roll the dice, play a character.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the length of the campaign, like you can be proactive in something that's only going to last a couple of months, but it's probably better, and the payoff is probably stronger if it's something that's going to take characters from, I hate to throw out the numbers, I don't know, level 2 to 10, 2 to 6. Like if there's some time span so that you can actually accomplish some of these, because some of the goals are big. Yeah, your long-term goals could be really big.
It definitely suggests a lot of investment in the game. So this isn't something that you would use for like a one-shot. I mean, intentionally used for a one-shot.
Right.
Like I think about your guys' characters in the Delta Green game, which people can go back and listen to. But if your characters in the Delta Green game, like you guys sort of did it organically. Like you made up small goals for the one shot just because you played very human characters. And I think, and I think that's really the intent of this first chapter, is to build characters that feel like real people, not just, Bob
Stat
the fighter.
blocks.
Bob the fighter.
Yeah. Well, and that's a really difficult line to walk, because I think that you're right in terms of like games that we talk about with D&D and other things and everything like that. I can't say that goals are necessarily like always a huge talking point, at least mechanically within the other games that we've played. Like some games do emphasize this is your character's goal, or this is like an aspiration or something like that they're trying to accomplish. And your ability to write goals is something that is it's kind of like, because there's two parts of it. And I think that they do, and for me at least, they do in this first section, they do a really good job talking about like, well, as a player, these goals are your goals. This is not for the DM to give you your goals. However, the DM can obviously work with you to say like, killing the other player characters isn't a great PC goal. Maybe we should reevaluate that goal, but maybe it is.
That would be a very interesting goal, thoe.
Yeah, like I have a desire to PvP all of the other party members. Like I mean that may be an interesting goal, but maybe not conducive to again a long-term game. But it does give them at least a framework to decide like how the structures of the goals go with. And I think that if you haven't been in business and you haven't gone through corporate training and stuff like that, you really you might find this to be kind of like helpful in how to structure a goal. Because for me, there's two parts to goals, right? There are the goals themselves and the systems that support it, right? So in this game, it's basically this, I think, does a really good job telling you this is how you define a good goal that makes sense. Like so like and it uses a very similar methodology to the SMART goals, which I mean honestly, as I was reading these first 3 chapters, I was like, whoa, SMART goals. I'm back. Yeah. I'm back into some of my other books, and it's, and so it wasn't, I wouldn't say that was super original for me, but applying it to role-playing games, I hadn't really like done that before.
No, it's important because you have to, the goals have to be the right type, right? Like I want to be rich and powerful is not a good long-term goal. Like it's vague and abstract, and there's no consequences if I don't do it, right? I want to win back my family fortune from the man who, the person who stole it from my father or my mother. That's a goal, and I want to be a strong enough fighter that when I confront them, I can win, kind of stuff. I just pull stuff out of my thin air.
And I mean, it's like when you look at characters that you like from movies or books or comics or whatever it is, you go like, well, you look at Inigo Montoya. He was very focused on a specific goal that he wanted to accomplish by the end of the movie. And you can take those kind of goals and you can use that as kind of a basis to understand how your character would do that. But then it also kind of elaborates to say, like, well, you can't just choose, like, I want to get the 6-fingered man, right? I need to have little goals that lead me to that larger and larger goal. And so I think they do a good job of kind of like laying that out for people that, you know, so they can say like, hey, for your role playing, this is how we've discovered how to do it. And I think that the one thing I'm really enjoying as I'm reading is that you get case studies as you're doing this. Like, they provide examples from their own game and everything like that. And since they seem to have run a lot of different games with, I can't tell if it's a lot of different tables. At least they seem like they've got a lot of different games under their belt.
It seems like they drew a lot from Blades in the Dark, though.
It did. It seemed to be it would seem to be a very big a catalyst, I guess.
Inspirational point.
Yeah, like an inflection point.
Blades in the Dark was the aha moment, guys.
There you go.
Right. Yeah. To go back to some of that corporate speak, right?
So I have a question for you. One of the things that I thought of while I was reading this that I kind of had to question myself is how do you reckon? So if a person has these very finite goals, the character has these very finite goals, how would you encourage a player to explain why they're not pursuing those goals and instead are going in adventures that might not have anything to do with these goals?
Well, I think that there's times where you're in a party, right? It's not just you solo adventuring. And I think that there's times where different things get set aside in the moment, you know, like maybe you need more money or more loot or treasure to fulfill your goal, or somebody else's goal is more time sensitive than yours is. I you know, it depends on the group and it depends on the circumstances. But if there's 4 or 5 or 6 of you, you obviously can't all be working on all of your short-term goals all at the same time. I don't think there's probably a world where they intersect better than that. But.
Well, that's kind of my worry actually. Is that they are.
So this is the answer to that question, in my opinion, is consequences. Okay. Honestly, if you outline goals that you want your character to achieve and they don't pursue them in the slightest, consequences for not hitting those goals is what comes to mind. And it's not like bad consequences necessarily, but it could be. But it does mean that, like, if you don't get this goal, how does that interfere with the rest of your goals? And and if they aren't goals that you wanted to pursue in the first place, maybe you need to just chat with them about getting new goals.
Well, that's sort of what I'm saying is, so say, and I guess your Princess Bride comment kind of illustrates it to a degree. The reason that Inigo Montoya isn't just pursuing the six-fingered man is because he has to have money, and that's why he's working for Vicini. So I guess that makes sense. But I just mean like I get there being consequences for them not following their goals. I just mean from a character standpoint, like how do you encourage the player to not just single-mindedly like say, I have this goal, I'm not going to go fight this dragon, I need to find out where my sister is. Like that's more what I mean is like how do you keep them so this is going to happen with some some players where they make up goals that they feel are really good and really important and they're going to want to follow those goals.
Well, I think and maybe this is where I'm going to suggest 2 things and you guys can decide if these are things that are how you would do it. So consequences, like I said, that's usually if a player is just kind of like ignoring the goals that they set, just have the consequences have impact into the game and how it plays.
Yeah, I don't think
but he's not saying that they're ignoring them. He's saying
in this case you're pursuing it single-mindedly
because the party is doing something else.
They're invested in them 100%.
So here's where I think you probably go with that. If I'm suggesting something, because this sounds like a situation in which a character has decided this wants to be a top tier goal for them, like maybe a long-term goal is to find their sister was kidnapped by whatever. Well, obviously you're going to have goals in between. And then when you're having that collaborative goal making session, they're going to want to say, hey, I want this game to be about finding my lost sister. That's going to be my that's going to be my one long-term goal. And if they can convince everyone that they have that protagonist moment for that long-term goal, that's fine. But maybe the negotiation is that, well, for short-term goals, these are the types of adventures we want to go on to. And then as the DM, what you're doing is you're going, okay, well, how do these threads intersect so that I can say, like, he can pursue this goal, as long as he's like helping these people over here, and it kind of can take a roundabout way to it. So I think that the give and take is that if people agree that long-term goal sounds good as a party, because maybe then they become a band of mercenaries that he's hired to find his sister,
or just his friends, the Scooby Gang.
Maybe
going after to find his sister.
We have role played the Scooby Gang more than once.
we have, but I mean, that would be my suggestion. I'd be curious as to if you guys thought that was something, because either you give into the goal and have the players kind of design around that being.
Well, I mean, I guess that's what this is suggesting, is if they have a strong goal and that's what they're following, like, that is the adventure. Your idea is GM take backseat to their goals and exploring their
right
goals.
Yeah,
and I get that, but it's just one of those things that I'm kind of curious. I guess what I mean more is, like, if one person starts to dominate, but then there's other tools that we've talked about before if one person is trying to steal all the spotlight. So I think that makes sense. It was just more of an interesting thing to think about when you run into this sort of situation where there will be some players who really are excited about their background, and it will be easy for them to grab the reins of the horse and be.
Well, no, and I think that's a fair comment to make, because when you develop these goals, if you're not an assertive personality, somebody that is an assertive personality in that situation is going to be like, okay, well, these are my 6 goals, and I'm very much a doer, so I'm going to get my 6 goals done. And the other person's like, I'm just along for the ride, man. Like,
because if you recall, back in the day, we played a game where my character has decided he was going to kill the gods. And I almost murdered I almost got the party killed at least once, because I was forcing it all along, if you recall. And that's kind of the situation I'm talking about.
Yeah, but I think that, you had a goal, but I don't think anybody else really did. So everyone was kind of caught up in your kamikaze mission.
Oh, yeah, they were following my lead. Yeah, 100%. They were following my lead. And that's kind of what I mean. Is like, they were willing to do it until you said, guys, you will die if you fight this guy.
Yeah. So, like, I mean, you were just making bad and suicidal choices at that point.
But I think if you get everybody to buy in, I mean, I think there has to be some general agreement from the party as to what we're going to pursue.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, because there's going to be plot hooks and things popping up and information that you're hearing rumors about, and all this stuff floating around. But ultimately, the party has to decide what the most pressing time-bound thing is. And hopefully the group can help overcome one or two players that want to domineer. But one of the things I really liked about the book was that some of the examples they gave were like, hey, here's the time I tried this, and it turned out really bad. like it was lame. Like, and most of the examples were when they were first trying to be more proactive, with their players. And they were like, I talked them through all this stuff, and then I'm creating a villain, and then I'm creating this lame villain that doesn't do anything except react to them. Well, and all I did was turn the tables 180 degrees, and it's like the Spider-Man meme with the 3 Spider-Men looking at each other. Like it's all the same thing from a different angle, right?
Yeah. And part of the thing that I have to remember, again, is that the if you're doing this, story isn't the one that the GM necessarily had in mind. It's the one that the players want to tell. And that's something because I usually come to the table saying, hey, I want to play a game. I have a story in mind. And this is sort of not for that sort of mindset. So
no, I think it's much more sandboxy, don't you?
Yes, it would have to be, in my opinion.
Like, you could have an overarching thing that they eventually get to after 8 levels.
Or you could have an introductory adventure that is a little bit more of the GM's idea, and then they kind of branch out from the goals from there. I think is what my personal take on it would be.
Oh yeah, I can see that.
Well, and I mean, because I was looking this up, and when you look at like where this was coming from, like the entire purpose of this book seemed to be to address the issue of like they wanted to shift the focus from the GM narrative to the player-driven stories, and the players have more agency and they drive the plot a lot more. And I think. And there's a spectrum of what players want and everything like that. And I feel like if you guys, and this is what's interesting to me, is that like when I look at the recommendations for the players and everything like that, I can see how those would be beneficial. And if you wanted to try it out using like a pre-made adventure, like as a DM, I'm already using some of this advice just to try it in the home game as well as the games that we're running, because I'm taking the time to examine the NPCs that I have that are already generated for the story. And I'm going, do they fall into a certain faction? Do they fall into and when they're looking, are they like a patron? Are they an ally? Are they a villain? And I did find that to be a weird 3-tier classification where you have like villains, allies, and patrons. I mean, villains to me seems like, I mean, I would probably just put it like as an antagonist, I guess, but people who are antagonistic to the players aren't necessarily villains, but yeah, whatever.
Well,
it's
I
semantics.
thought they addressed that point in the chapter on that. Was sometimes people try to make the villains not be evil, and so they're not obviously bad because one of their motivations, are there's some human element that you can start to have sympathy and then potentially join them. I thought what they said is you just keep pushing them. You don't have to get into things that make people uncomfortable for them to be evil, but like they're just unrelenting.
It's just it was like I said, more a semantic thing on my part, because one of the examples that they used was that the players had a villain who was also it was also an ally or something like that, because they had to go to the villain to get help. And so the villain was advancing.
Well, the players were inadvertently furthering the villain's agenda.
Yeah.
I think the distinction is I think the reason they make a distinction is because it's what you can ask of the person. That like a patron is someone who you can ask for anything, sort of, because they're willing to help. Whereas, then an ally is somebody you can ask less, like they may do something for you. And then the villain is the person that's going to act in
opposition
to what you're doing. And so you may have NPCs that float in and out of that sort of diagram, but I mean you may have players that float in inside and out of that diagram, but yeah, and I think that's more what they like. You kind of want to have a clear idea of where they start. So, and I think that's more the point to that. And you're right, it's just terminology, like
and so, but I'm trying to use it because I think that rather than necessarily just say that this is either good or bad advice, I think it needs a little bit of road testing. You got to take the car for a test drive to know if this is actually got anything. And so for our Dragonbane game, I basically, even on our most recent adventure, I had kind of plotted out what are the short, medium, and long-term goals for the people that you were encountering, as well as where did they, what were the Venn diagrams and everything like that as to how they fit. And so and this is just so that so I could kind of see it in action. And one thing that I thought was interesting about how it opens up is that, by applying this as something that didn't necessarily as overtly describe it in the rules, and I kind of filled in these blanks myself, is it does open up the modules to be a little bit more free form, and that you can kind of predict for, because you're like, okay, well, I know my player's goal is at least this. So even if you haven't gone through proactive player creation and everything like that, you at least have a sense of what your players are trying to accomplish. And in this Dragonbane game, we're playing the Dragon Emperor's adventure path. So I know that these guys are at least trying to get these 4 statue pieces. I know at the very minimum, that's where your goals are, or else this game is going nowhere fast, kind of thing.
Right.
But, knowing that and knowing that you're at this place to try to see if there's a statue piece, I go, okay, well, now what? So they want the statue piece. They want to get inside this tomb. Okay, well, what does this guy want? And so when you see how one of our players approached it, it was like, well, knowing what I know about this NPC, this NPC doesn't, his goal isn't to fight the players. Like, he doesn't want to go and fight them. That's not one of his goals. Is he sees player characters and he fights them.
Right.
And so,
and really, that shouldn't be any NPC's goal, really.
But it feels like in some D&D situations that almost how it goes in. Like you kick in the door and you find a goblin. Oh, me and that goblin, boom, instant conflict.
Right.
but I think it adds a little bit more dynamic nature to it. So even if you're not doing a full sandbox game, I still think it even has a place, even in the pre-written stuff, if you align some of those thoughts behind it. So I'm curious as to your guys' thoughts, because I know I just talked for a minute,
one. We just skipped a chat. We already skipped a chapter. We're talking about NPCs now instead of factions. But anyways, we can go back in a second. But I think one of the things that I think is interesting is if you have a decent kind of experienced player group, you do some of this stuff just instinctively. Like, for example, I think the NPCs you're talking about is probably the giant. The giant didn't really want to just fight us. Is that
Glam?
Yeah, Glam the giant. Well, and I think that kind of gets back to us, is like, if you have a good table, they don't look at every obstacle as one that they have to smash in. Even though we didn't go through proactive role playing or anything like that, we still are playing our characters very much as humanized characters. And so I think we do a lot of some of the stuff just instinctively. Like we approach the problem like, okay, Glam is our obstacle. What can we do to get Glam out of the way? Well, we could fight him, but he's a giant. He may hurt us a lot, and maybe it's not worth it. And so we did what most parties should probably do more often, and we talked to him. And I think that's kind of where this, like, playing humanized characters, I think, is the overall goal of the book, is playing characters that act like real people as opposed to.
But I think
which is occasionally hard for my Wolfen, whose only skills are stab things with different weapons.
Well, but when you look at when you look at other games, and I'll just use Age of Worms as kind of a comparable example, because that was written around 3.5. It's just like, you see wolves, the wolves attack. Is that really the ecology of a wolf? Is just to sit in the den and look for player characters?
Yeah,
not really.
Exactly. No, I know. That's what I'm saying. Is like looking at it as things as puzzles or obstacles instead of just always combat encounters. I think that's one thing that the book suggests that's important, especially to the D&D mindset. Because the D&D mindset is a lot of times, if there's a goblin in the way in the dungeon, what do? You murder, death, kill the goblin as quickly as possible.
There's a reason the term hack and slash was invented.
Right. Yeah. And murder hobo.
And not to say that every group has played through those adventures and had that kind of like, the murder hobo approach. But I have to say that the way that the adventure is designed is it basically says, well, we've given you enough to be a murder hobo. Right. Any more is on the DM.
No, I think that's a great suggestion of this, is to humanize the NPCs a little bit and give them a little bit more of motivation. So it isn't that this puzzle is best solved with punching it in the face.
Right.
That's like, and I guess, and really I think what's really interesting about this is why it's kind of focused towards D&D, is I feel like there's more fantasy games have a tendency to lean on that a little bit more than like modern day games or some science fiction games. When I think back to some of the like Shadowrun games that we've run, mechanics aside, they were more like for example, the last Shadowrun game I ran, the two players decided to have a hookah shop, and they kind of had their own plans. They kind of had their own plans and motivations from there on. Well, how are we going to keep the shop open? We have to do shadow runs to make money because the shop doesn't make enough money.
Well, the shop was it wasn't a front. It was literally our job. I would say it was a front, but we were so unsuccessful as shadow runners that it was our job to sell hookahs.
You did both. You guys were,
Yeah, it's true.
Talented men, Renaissance men. You're a Renaissance man in the industry.
Yeah, well, we tried our best. So one question I had, and this is something that I was curious about your guys' thought on, is that this Game Master series, this proactive book series, and everything like that. I guess before we do that, maybe we should talk about factions.
We should talk about factions. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'll talk about factions first. So the second chapter that we missed about factions is actually an interesting one, because it's kind of a template that you stamp on your NPCs to give you easy ways to know what would be the way an NPC should react. So you're not always having to create individualized goals for every single person that they run into. And so I think in terms of this, they basically broke it down into 4 factions. Was that what you guys had? Because you had governments, you had labor, you had religion, you had crime, and
Yeah, I
That was it.
believe so. Yeah.
I believe those were the 4 factions. And so it was nice because it was interesting to see how, and what I thought was really helpful here was they gave examples as to, what does a PC goal look like? And when you look at a certain faction, how is that faction's goal in opposition to that PC goal? And I'll just give an example. Like the crime faction was, if you source a rare ingredient or expert from a certain part of town, the criminal faction might be to start a new protection racket in that part of town. So really they're not necessarily opposing the PC by saying, oh, we're actually going after this one guy. They're saying, oh, why are you coming into our part of town? This is our territory. And then now you have to negotiate with this criminal faction because your goal to get that thing or person is now encompassed in their conflicting goal that is more interesting than just, we don't want you to talk to that one guy.
Yeah, and assigning factions also gives you kind of the ability to, in broad strokes, know how they might react to the players.
Mhm.
Like you have that moment, like instead of having that moment where like 2 guards show up, like do they, and you're like, oh god, do they really care if this is happening? Like kind of their motivations related to the faction they're in.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good GM tip just all around, to kind of have a faction idea of their like what their thoughts are going to be and their motivation are going to be in case you have to like ad lib something that's happening.
Sure. And Jeff, what did you think about the faction stuff?
I thought for only having 4, they encompassed almost everything you could think of, right?
Mm-hmm.
I agree with Brent. It was a theme that was repeated in these first 3 chapters, in that whole idea of taking some of the work off of the GM. Like, the factions have these larger overall goals, like what they're trying to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the individual characters, as being part of those or NPCs being part of those factions, want to do those things. And you only have to worry about short or medium term goals if they intersect with the players. And they don't always intersect with the players, or if the players intersect with them.
Mm-hmm.
I get it. It takes some of the pre-prep and shifts it more real time.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you want to prepare a whole bunch of stuff in advance that you may not wind up using for several sessions.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought the factions, the way they broke them down, government, labor, crime, and religion was good.
But the neat part about that interaction, like in the moment, is you can say, oh, they're part of this crime faction I made up. This is what they think. So
Yeah.
these guys are going to be like an arm of that, and that makes that ad lib moment, that kind of thinking on your feet moment, a little bit easier from a prep standpoint, because you're like, you don't have to like, oh god, would they care? What would they do? You can kind of make them a little bit more, faceless.
Yeah,
at that time. So
it's true. It's true.
Normally, people ask permission when they come onto our turf and break into places.
Right, exactly. And I did
by permission, I mean give us bribes.
I did like the idea too, really quick, of factions is, and I don't usually like clocks, and I probably wouldn't do it as a clock idea, but I would do it as kind of a milestone thing, where it's like, if the players do this, if players get here, it means this faction has achieved this much of their goal. And like, I think that's a good idea. The clocks are some way to like set milestones for their goals. So that allows you to have like one of the things that I've talked about with other people before is like those video game moments where you like walk into the town and it's just like they're all just standing there waiting for you to be there. Like they're not real people. Like they never
like Westworld.
Yeah, like they never leave that spot.
Interact.
And so that ability to like make derive progress for other factions' goals allows you to add more life to the world.
Yeah.
Which I think is cool. Which is
I think that's a good point, because when my brain hears clocks, I think that they have to measure, some of what they're measuring is time based, and I guess it kind of is, but it really, they're more used to measure progress, right? Like percentage of progress.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. I like that.
Yeah, no, I think it's really good. And I think that when we, and looking at the 3 chapters, the 3 chapters give some pretty, I would say, solid advice right out of the gate for game masters. Now, I guess the one question I was going to ask earlier is that, now, do you guys feel like the advice in itself is original, or do you feel like and novel enough on its own, or do you feel like this is stuff that you've still seen other places? other games and all that.
I feel it's stuff I've seen other places that's been kind of codified into one place.
Yeah.
Because like I said, there's a lot of, especially with modern games, like a lot of modern games have this stuff readily built in.
Yeah.
Like Monster of the Week, for example, as an example, like a lot of your character motivations you get out of your playbook. Like, oh, your mom and dad died due to vampires, that's why you're hunting monsters. Your goal is, and then you can personalize it a little bit, but like a lot of this stuff is codified. The Alien book, it's like you give like their goals are like either they're pre-designed or you and the player design them for the different acts,
right?
And then I think some of the stuff is just stuff that if you've GM'd a long time, you wind up wanting more out of your NPCs than to just be, or not your NPCs, your players, than to just be, I'm the fighter that runs in the dungeon. Sort of like I said about the Shadowrun game, like a lot of the Shadowrun games that I've run in the most recent past have been, okay, well, what are your guys' motivations outside of, like, why are you doing Shadowruns? Like, what is your end goal for doing Shadowruns and stuff like that? And it does make the world, it made the world much more deep and colorful. Because and then you guys built off the world, and that's kind of what the goal is. Like as I said, that doesn't seem to happen in high fantasy as much, and I think that's why it's cool. I think that's one of the reasons that this book is good, is because it is more towards the 5e mindset, and I think expanding that towards D&D is like just kind of like the future. So
yeah, I agree with Brent. The high concept exists out there, right? The broad strokes exist. And even some of the smaller things that they're talking about exist, but the way they put it together, the target audience that they're aiming for, I think that's the unique spin that they're bringing to it, and not having to go by Blades in the Dark and Fabula Ultima and Monster of the Week, and you know what I mean. Even if you're buying PDFs, that gets expensive. There's one book that kind of talks about it to help nudge you into there if that's the kind of thing that you and your group want to explore. Right.
Well, it's the fact of the matter is there's a lot of D&D content out there. Like there's a lot, like D&D is the biggest game, so there's like a cottage industry about how to make your D&D game better. And I think this is a quality. I think this is one of those quality things that's like, this can make your D&D game better by just like exposing your players to it and kind of thinking about it. I do think that if you're going to use these concepts, you probably should either have your players look at the Reddit thread that I think we all found, where it kind of gives you the summary of the book, or have them read the book, because I think it'll be easier for them to understand.
Yeah. So, because the one thing I wanted to mention, and I don't know if this is there, is that necessarily the easiest thing is that, when you're talking about the D&D stuff, I did do a little bit of research, for like, what do people consider the best RPG books to read? Like, what books you read to improve your D&D game?
The Rift's core book came up every time, right?
Surprisingly, it didn't make any of the threads that I was able to find.
Really? I would have thought that and Traveler would have been like 1, 2, maybe GURPS thrown in there.
People love the Traveler life path, though, and that covers
actually has a lot of stuff. We're being funny, but
the Traveler actually, like, if you look at Traveler, people are like, the character generation for Traveler is one of their favorite things.
It is.
Rifts was obviously a joke because,
but what's interesting about it to me is that, like, what we've kind of expressed and what we're saying is that, some of this stuff, maybe it's not the most original, but it is a great consolidation and a synthesis of all this stuff into a good first part that you can kind of wrap your head around very easily. Because what I discovered is that, I read tabletop role-playing games. You guys read tabletop role-playing games. And if you're a D&D only person, you're probably not going to get very far out of that comfort zone. And especially if you're really into it, you can spend hundreds, if not thousands of dollars just on D&D to have a very full collection. But when you're looking at some of these other games, it's not apparent the type of skills that you can improve in your D&D role-playing game. Because one of the things that came up, somebody said, everyone should read Broodmother Sky Fortress. And I was like, what the hell is that? And so what's interesting,
I think I've heard of it. I'm not just saying that, but
that's amazing, because I
can't tell you what it's about.
So,
but I probably saw it on a Reddit thread, apparently.
but Broodmother Sky Fortress is an adventure that was written for Lamentations of the Flame Princess. And anybody that knows what Lamentations of the Flame Princess is, it's a very, very weird. I don't know what is the way to describe it. It's a very weird kind of psychedelic. Who knows? It's all over the place. Very OSR though. And the author of this, Jeff Rentz, has put together an adventure and then put it, because Jeff has a blog called Jeff's Game Blog. He's been writing for years about OSR style games and everything like that. It's very well regarded. But he consolidated a lot of his favorite advice for OSR style games and put it at the end of this book. Mm-hmm. But me, as a person that wants to learn more about gaming and how to improve my game, isn't going to know that, they have great OSR advice at the end of this Broodmother Skyforged thing, or do I want to read 15 years of blog advice? Is there an easy way to find the topic I'm looking for? You know what I'm saying? Like it's kind of, these gems are hidden throughout all these different games, because I have to say that, the way Fabula Ultima describes, campaign generation from that collaborative storytelling thing was a really big eye opener for me. But if I was looking at collaborative storytelling, I wouldn't go, I should just buy Fabula Ultima. Like,
right. You're right. You don't leave that space. And so having a book that says this is for 5e, like, it is brilliant. And the funny thing is like, I remembered something while we were talking about villains, is Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, like, and this is something that the recent editions of Dungeons and Dragons gotten away from. Like, I have a book called The Complete Villains Guide. It's one of the blue books back from AD&D, and like, that did go into how to make a good villain in your story. It's something that has kind of been is so it's good to see the secondary market for people still suggesting these things, because I don't think that the current iteration of Dungeons and Dragons is going to do that. They're not going to tell you how to make a better villain. They're either going to try and present you a villain, or try and let you figure it out yourself. So I think that's I think what I'm saying is, I think you're right about this book. I think that's one of the things that's great about this book, is it's a place you can say, 5e, I play 5e. This book might be able to help me be a little bit better of a GM, and you'll pick it up. And I think that's what's brilliant about this book.
Yeah, and because I think there are gaming books out there. Like, there's a Steve Jackson's How to Be a Game Master book. Like, I don't remember who wrote it, but it's from like 2002 that everyone says you should read this book. This is like mind blowing kind of stuff. But I can't actually for the life of me think of how many other tabletop RPG skill books. Because if you ask like my wife's uncle and you go, well, how many books on poker do you have? He has a library of books about the game poker, right? That are just poker. How many, like, there are people that have books on chess, other sports and everything like that, to understand how the hobby is and how you improve yourself within the hobby, either to advance your play and all that stuff. The tabletop RPGs, I don't think that library is as big, or at least it's not as well known, because I know about like the Kobold Guide to World Building. That's like something that's an interesting book out there. There's like this Game Masters Guide. There's other things, but I think most of the other tips and tricks I've learned have been from other game systems that have had a good process in place that I just said, yoink, I'm taking that to my other games going forward.
Or just repetition, or you just figure it out for yourself during games. Yeah, I agree. And that's why I think these are kind of cool.
Yeah, there's like a million blogs out there that offer game advice that you probably gems that you just don't know exist.
That is one thing I will say that is nice, is when I started gaming, like, those didn't exist. Like, the only way you would ever find out anything is by trying a different game, period. Because the internet didn't exist. So, going out and reading articles and, trying to be a better GM if you want, I think it's a good investment if you enjoy the hobby. So, and listening to us.
Yeah, we're on the journey with you. Okay. I think that there's I think if at the end of this, there's only one other thing I'd probably ask you guys, is that do you think that this actually sets out and achieves its goals based on this first part to reduce game master load and puts it more on the players?
I think so. I mean, I want to finish the rest of the, 8, 9 chapters?
Yeah, it's 3 parts, 9 chapters, I think.
Okay, 3 parts. I think so.
I feel like it moves it around a little. I don't feel like, I think you're still going to have prep because you still have to say, well, they have these goals. What am I going to do with these goals? And then what NPCs am I going to introduce to these goals? And some of that you can be like, oh, what NPC is doing this for you? And you can ask the player, but that's going to be in the moment. So you're still going to have to I think, some prep to prepare this more sandboxy,
Yes.
a proactive game. So it probably it reduces. Let me put it this way: I think what it reduces is you don't like that moment where you sit down and go, "Okay, I have characters. What the are they gonna do now? Like what? What? I guess I'm gonna make a dragon and some treasure that they need to have." Like it reduces your having to just make it all up. You can draw from their ideas and make the story from that. And I think that's the brain work is less. I think the footwork is probably still comparable.
Because I think the one thing, if you weren't doing this before with your game, is that now you do need to, I'm in this village of 500. Well, what factions does this village have? What NPCs, what are they doing? Like, because once the players give you their goals, you have to start creating those other people because you need to have intersections with the players to have conflict and, and all those kind of things. And so I do think that you're probably right. I wouldn't necessarily, if somebody wanted this to say, oh, if I can read this book, I'm never going to have to work as a GM again. That would be
Incorrect.
what I would take away. That would be the wrong.
That would be the wrong impression.
That's not the takeaway here.
the takeaway is that you're learning how to focus your work on the types of things that help a player that's more motivated to accomplish their own goals, how to react to them more appropriately with the types of things that create interesting stories.
They're giving you story beats, which is something that without it, they're not giving you at all. They're giving you story beats, and instead of you having to make up all the story beats, you can use their backstory and whatever to make your story beats, which is a lot less of the, like I said, like writer work, which is a lot less of the just sitting down and like writing your outline and stuff like that. You can insert their ideas more.
Yeah. So I was just curious if you guys felt like it reduced the work. I mean, it's still work. Like I'm still gonna have prep in my games and all that, but now I just have different kinds of prep as I try to include this work in.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, there's still going to be work, and this work is going to seem, because it's new, it's going to seem a little more frustrating and a little harder than the stuff that you have years of experience doing. I'm still, fingers crossed that it shifts some of it, you know what I mean, and makes it a little bit shorter.
Yeah.
But maybe it doesn't. Like we'll have to see. I'll be interested to get your reports as to how you're trying to integrate some of this stuff, because Brett and I are just reading the book. I'm not currently running any games, so yeah, my prep time is not much, and it's still not much after reading the book.
And again, prepping for a one shot, like if you're just doing a one shot or a short campaign, like it's gonna be different than this. Like they can have some of this proactive stuff, but one shots are usually more directed stories because you have a finite goal at the end.
Well, and I think that one thing I would be interested to see is that because proactive role playing is different than collaborative role playing, right? And so much as that, I think if you really want to reduce the amount of work that you do, collaborative role playing is where it is. And I think I've read so many things lately that I want to say that in this it suggests it, but I don't think it's as overt of advice as you get in some of the other things that we've reading. So for example, like how often do you have a player describe a scene or something in the scene, right? Those kind of world building types of things. I think that's where you start to really take the cognitive load off the DM, is to say like, oh, you guys go into an inn. What kind of inn did you guys think, what was your impression of the inn when you walked in? Like, I'm not doing any of the work. It's all you guys know. No, but I think I think you probably find that that's where a lot of work comes in, is just to have designed all these locations that are fantastic, even if they're just for the players to try to travel through. But I guess I would be curious, because that was one of the things. I don't think I've actually seen a collaborative storytelling book for a role-playing game other than the notes and stuff you get in other games. but that's just me.
There might be in this. There
it
might be,
exist.
and there might be in this. Have you
This-
checked their book line?
I don't think I saw it in the Game Masters Handbook of. I think I saw puzzles and traps, villains, NPCs. I think those are the only 4 I remember. But there's a book out there somewhere, I'm sure. So, but needless to say, I think that's enough discussion for part 1 of the Game Masters Handbook, proactive role playing. I think that was a good discussion. It's our first book report. So if people in the comments want to skewer us for our book reporting, go ahead. Or if you have other questions that you want to know about our thoughts considering the book, let us know. We're happy to continue the conversation in the comments. Give our 2 cents on this. By no means have we finished the book, so we're still going to reserve our final rating. Whatever. We'll give full judgment at the very end of it after we've completed all 9 chapters.
We'll give notes.
Yeah, we'll give notes. Sure. But if anything, we appreciate Jonah and Tristan for writing the book, to getting this type of content out there, to at least having a source of inspiration for people to use when they want to improve their game. We want to say thank you. We're enjoying the book and so far, and we'll talk about it again soon. So, Jeff, if people want to talk to us outside of the comments, where should they go?
They can go to Facebook, Threads, or Twitter. We are at Rollwise, or you can email us, rollwiseguys@gmail.com.
And as always, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you being part of our conversation and our table. We hope you roll well and roll wise and be safe out there.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.